I grew up with two tribal identities, the Meskwaki Nation of Iowa, the Ho-Chunk Nation of Nebraska. And we grew up in a non-native community, a white community in Iowa. And we would travel between both tribes, and we would go to different tribal events and family events. But usually on our way home, my mother would tell us, when you get to school on Mondays, she would say, and they ask you to do show and tell, don't tell them anything you saw, did, or heard. She said, because the white man does not understand the Indian. And if you tell them anything, she said, the first thing they will try to do is take it all away. I called it the law of silence, my parents' law of silence. I realized at the age of like 13 or 14, the loophole in my parents' law of silence was they may have said that you cannot speak, but they never said you cannot paint or draw. And so that's what made me decide I needed to become a painter. I don't regard my work as anything specifically about Ho-Chunk or Meskwaki information. It's information that informs the work. For instance, the color palette in the darker paintings is derived from the palette used in traditional men's dancers' regalia. So the red and the greens, and the black and white are the key colors to my palette. What inspired me within like the work around midnight in the metaphysical economy were events partially in my family life. Around 2004, sadly, my mother passed away. And then in 2008, my father passed away. And what had happened was my palette just went to black after that period. My father was a veteran of the Korean War. And during the course of the funeral process, the flag was always featured prominently because in Indigenous cultures, veterans are honored. I ended up back in my studio just with these after images from all of these events and began painting the American flag in a still life setting. But you can't stay with that type of thing for very long. And eventually the labor that it took to make those paintings became just that labor. So what had happened was they were black and white, and they began to evolve just into stripes. And that's where the stripe paintings come from. Part of my interest is also indirectly in blanket patterns, because blanket patterns are part of a metaphysical economy. The metaphysical, what it means to me, it's the idea of how we value different things. What I realized throughout, the process of traditional Ho-Chunk and traditional Meskwaki ways of funerals, that the blanket is a prized possession, and that within Indigenous cultures, the blanket means a lot, but within mainstream culture, it's just a blanket. In Indigenous culture, it's given as a sign of honor. And I always view that as evidence of what I call the metaphysical economy. I'm Duane Slick, and I'm an artist.